Do you have a diabetes, or you have been diagnosed with a diabetes in a recent time? Do you know that your diagnosis of a diabetes can be a faulty, especially if it is done by the Hba1c method? Or let's say you are already a diabetic and you are using Hba1c as a tool to measure your sugar control. If your answer is yes, then you have to watch my today's video, because in this video I'm going to discuss one such important medical condition which is so common all over the world, which usually gives a wrong interpretation of Hba1c test. Now you will wonder, how does it matter? Answer is, it matters quite a lot. Let's say that you do not know that you have a diabetes, and suddenly a doctor does your Hba1c test and says that, listen, you are a diabetic now. So you got a stamp of a diabetic for rest of your life. And living through that is not an easy thing. You start restricting yourself in so many places. There can be a possibility that a lot of medical policies you might not be eligible for, isn't it? Or let's say you already know you are a diabetic and you are using Hba1c as a tool to measure the control of your sugar. And all of you know that as good Hba1c level is, the less chances of the complication. An Hba1c test being a gold standard test in terms of the reliability, and it is very easy to perform. You don't need to wait for fasting. You can do it at any time of the day. It usually overlooks the day-to-day variables like your stress, your sleep, your lack of physical activity, or your dietary pattern changes, or fasting or feasting. So when you have so much flexibility, Hba1c becomes one go-to test. But the Hba1c test has a one drawback which is so common in the entire world, and that is often overlooked. And that is the reason why it happens that you assume that your sugar is well in control check, but in reality it may not be. If it is not well controlled, then you are more bound to have the complication. And you are more bound that your doctor might prescribe you high dosage of the medication, or doctor might give you insulin therapy, which actually you could avoid, isn't it? So that is the reason why the reliability of the Hba1c test becomes a questionable in such medical condition. Otherwise, Hba1c test is a perfect test. And to know more about Hba1c test, I have made another video. If you want, you can watch that video. But in today's topic, I am going to discuss one such medical condition which affects the Hba1c. What is that condition? How we can tackle it so that you become more alert about it. That's what we are going to discuss in our today's topic. Namaste. My name is Dr. Tanvi Mayur Patel. I'm an endocrinologist, hormone specialist doctor from Mumbai, India. Diabetes, one of the most common metabolic health problems, especially a country like India where I come from. We are a diabetic capital. Every second and third individual is a diabetic. Now, the moment we say diabetic, there are so many times when a diagnosis of the diabetes happens by the Hba1c method, which can be a misleading diagnosis. So imagine you do not have a diabetes, but suddenly if someone tells you you're a diabetic, what all will change in your life? You will start looking at food in a different way. You will start doing a physical activity, which of course in a way it's good. But still you will go through that stress. Oh my God, now I'm a diabetic. I need to take medication. I'm going to land up with complication. Or if you have anyone in your family who had a diabetes and gone through the complication, you will always live in the fear. Your family members might restrict you from eating certain food items. And suddenly you will realize that entire world has changed. It's not easy to be termed as a diabetic in reality. Such wrong diagnosis can be avoided if you have the right knowledge about it, the Hba1c testing. And that medical condition which causes the problem is none other than anemia. I'm sure this word does not need to be, informed in a way that you might not have heard this word before. It's not a new disease. Anemia happens left, right, and corner. In fact, 30 to 32% of the population worldwide has anemia. So you understand 30 to 32% who has anemia, and these are the same population who's going to have a diabetes. So imagine how much discrepancy can happen. What discrepancy can happen, how to avoid it, that's what we are going to learn in my today's topic. Okay, so just to give a brief, what is anemia, what is RBC, what is hemoglobin, what is the Hba1c test, you need to know some basics about it before we move forward to the little higher level of the topic. Okay, so first question, what is anemia? Anemia is a condition in which the oxygen carrying capacity of your hemoglobin of the blood cell is reduced. Okay, how will you know that you have anemia? Of course, body symptoms are plenty many, but if you ever do a test called as a complete blood count, in that you will see hemoglobin gram percentage. So when a woman has a less than a 12 gram percent of hemoglobin, and when a man has a less than 13 gram percent of hemoglobin, we call it as a anemia. Okay, and this is the condition happens more commonly in women because they grow through certain physiological changes, like they have a regular monthly bleeding menstrual cycle, they go through the pregnancy, they go through the lactation. So all of that can give them anemia. Okay, so this is what is anemia. Okay, now there are plenty many different types of anemia which can exist, but in my today's topic I'm going to cover the 5 most common anemic condition which we routinely see in a general public. Okay, of course there are a lot of variation which are minor population suffering. For that you can speak with your doctor one-on-one. But in my today's video, I'm going to cover these 5 topics one by one. Okay. Secondly, coming to the Hba1c test. What is the science behind the Hba1c test? Okay. The science behind the Hba1c test is that this test gives us the average 120 day of the blood sugar. Okay. It overlooks whether you have done any kind of a changes for a short term. It also takes into consideration your medication taking habit or physical activity habit, dietary changes, stress changes, sleep changes, or any other changes which you might have done in the last 3 months. So it makes this test a very reliable test. Okay. Third, what is the blood and the hemoglobin? So in our body we have a blood. Inside the blood, we have a red blood cells. It is this red blood cells which gives a red color to the blood. This red blood cells contains a one important structure called as hemoglobin. This hemoglobin has a life of 120 days. And that is the reason why the Hba1c test gives us the average of 120 days of blood sugar. What happens? The sugar molecule which is present in the blood combines with this hemoglobin, and that is what we measure in the Hba1c test. That's a glycated hemoglobin, and that is the Hba1c test. Okay, so I've given you a rough background of all the important words which I am going to use in the later part of the video. Okay, so now coming to the first most common kind of anemia, and that is the iron deficiency anemia. Okay, the most common anemia among all of them. In entire world, nearly 2 billion people are suffering from iron deficiency anemia. And as the name suggests, these are the people have a deficiency of iron. Now, why did they develop a deficiency? First, either they don't consume enough of iron. Second, they are consuming the iron, but their digestive system is not able to absorb it. Then it's of no use, isn't it? And the third, you are losing iron in the form of a bleeding. Let's say you're a woman, you have a menstrual cycle, heavy menstrual bleeding, okay? Or let's say you got a piles problem where you're having bleeding from the every time you pass motion. So all of this blood loss, hemorrhages can give you iron deficiency anemia. Post surgery, after doing any kind of a road traffic accident, all of that can give this condition, okay? Now, why iron deficiency anemia and Hba1c? What is a correlation? So when you have an iron deficiency anemia, what happens? For RBC, new RBC to be formed, you need iron. And because RBCs are not formed in a long term, okay, the whatever RBC are present inside our body, their life increases. So rather than 120 days, their lifespan is more than that. And because the RBCs are more aged inside our blood, they combine with the glucose molecule for more period of time. And that is the reason why the people who have iron deficiency anemia has been found to have a high Hba1c. Yes. So you see, iron deficiency, most common anemia. What happens to Hba1c? It increases. So you will see in a general population, a person might not have that high sugar, but he or she is terminated to be highly uncontrolled diabetic. And this will leave them under more pressure. They feel that my diabetes is failing, I am failing. People go into depression. Doctor might increase the medicine. Doctor might start the insulin therapy. You understand so much problem a person can go through just because he is shown to have a high Hba1c, which is actually not the case. Okay. In fact, when we talk about the anemia and Hba1c, all the international guidelines have told that if you are going to diagnose any person a first time, a newly diabetic, ensure that you screen for the anemia. And if you find out that the person has anemia, please correct it. Because if you don't correct it, your Hba1c interpretation will always remain wrong. And third, for such people, keeping a strict target of Hba1c is also not recommended. So first thing first, correct your anemia. Alright, that's about the iron deficiency anemia. Alright, moving on to second type of anemia, and that is a hemolytic anemia. Okay, now what happens here? The word hemolysis, lysis means breakdown. So what happens here? The RBCs which are there in our body, they are breaking down before their age. Okay, so 120, which is the ideal age of the RBC, they are breaking down much before that. And that is the reason why their Hba1c interpretation will also be less. So these are the people, his or her Hba1c will always show low. So what is the problem? Again, there is a problem. A person might be under the wrong assumption that my sugar is perfectly controlled. But in spite of that, they are at a higher risk of developing diabetes complication. Yes. See, all the diabetic complication doesn't happen overnight. It takes months and years of high and uncontrolled sugar. So under the impression, the person is that my sugar are perfect, which are actually not. But because of that, they are landing up themselves in complication. So you need to be mentally alert about that also. Okay. Third type of anemia, which is again a common anemia, that is a sickle cell anemia. Okay. Now, what is a sickle cell anemia? It is relatively less common anemia, of course. This anemia has a more of an inheritance. It passes on from one generation to another generation. It usually have an autosomal recessive dominance. Okay. The normal RBC, the structure of that is like a disc shape. But when a person has a sickle cell anemia, the structure and the morphology of the RBC changes. It is more like a sickle shape. More or less looks like a moon, okay, crescent moon, okay. So when they have a sickle cell anemia whose structure of the RBC itself is not correct, and because of that, these are the RBC, they don't have a very good lifespan. Okay, they are dying before then their actual age, and because of that, sickle cell anemia people will also have a less lifespan of the RBC, and that contributes to less Hba1c. So if you know that you have a sickle cell anemia, inform that to your doctor so your doctor knows what is the problem and how to tackle it accordingly. All right. Fourth condition, and that is the thalassemia. Yes, I'm sure all of you must have heard about the thalassemia. Thalassemia is again like sickle cell anemia. It's also an inherited kind of a problem, passes on from generation to generation, and usually have an autosomal recessive dominance. Okay, thalassemia are of two types: thalassemia major and thalassemia minor. Okay, you will see thalassemia minor quite lot in the general public. Also, in world, nearly 2 to 5% of the people have a thalassemia minor. Okay, of course, thalassemia minor people have a less problem compared to thalassemia major, but of course, they also have a problem. What happens here? In thalassemia condition, the RBC production is affected. Okay, the RBCs don't produce that effectively, and whatever RBCs are there, they die off also early. And because of the reduced life expectancy, the Hba1c interpretation is also low. In reality, it will be high, but it will be misinterpreted as a low Hba1c. Okay. Not only that, in thalassemia minor, and thalassemia major condition, there are certain abnormal hemoglobin is produced, like hemoglobin F, which can further interfere with the practical test which we use for the Hba1c measurement in the laboratory setting. Okay, so again, this point you need to be aware of. Fifth condition, which is again a very common condition, and that we call it as a megaloblastic anemia. Okay, this anemia happens when your body does not have enough of vitamin B12, enough of folate. Okay, why a person will not have that? Maybe because you're not eating that, or maybe your body is not able to absorb it. Both the vitamin B12 and folate are very, very important for the synthesis of the DNA, that's a genetic material which is needed for the RBC production. So this kind of a condition will lead into impaired RBC production. Okay, and there are different kind of opinion have come out after collecting and gathering the data, that the people who have a megaloblastic anemia, few studies it has been shown that these are the people who have a higher level of the Hba1c than actual, and few studies have shown that there is not much of a change in Hba1c in such population. Okay, so you see, if you first of all you check, do you have a anemia? If yes, please correct it before you start jumping onto diabetic treatment, especially if you're a new diabetic. Okay, and if you already know that you have a diabetes, correct your anemia before relying completely on the Hba1c, because if you rely on it, and if that report itself is not 100% accurate, you are going to misdirect your own health. Okay, and I don't want you to do that. So please make this point in your mind before you start looking at your Hba1c results. Alright. I hope my today's video helped you learn a little bit more about your health. And if you like this video, please click on the like button. If you have any of your personal comment whose answer you're looking for, please write that in the comment box below. I try to read and answer them as early as I can. And if you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe so that you get more and more health related information. And we will meet again in another video with some good useful information. Till then, you take care of yourself. Namaste.